Welcome to Together, a higher ed podcast where we bring you stories, insights, and experiences from voices across the higher education sector. I'm Chase Haygood, the Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Utah. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jason Taylor, an Associate Professor here in the College of Education at the University of Utah, as well as the Assistant Dean for Transfer Student Success within the Office of Undergraduate Education, or Undergraduate Studies, as we call ourselves. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Jason, you and I have come to know each other. I knew your work before I came to the University of Utah. You are prolific in your field. You are a national, if not international, leader on research on transfer as well as community colleges and the work within higher education, thinking about what does it take to make the sector work for all of our students, no matter where they're coming from. So I'm really glad that you're here today. To get started, I'd love for you to share a story, share some information with our listeners, with our viewers about your own journey in higher education, and then perhaps, and I can remind you of it as we go, your role or your multiple roles, as it were, here inside the University of Utah. So first your journey and then your role.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm glad to be here. It's fun to have a conversation with you, especially about something like transfer and some of the work that we're doing in undergraduate studies and why it matters. So I attribute my interest in higher education and entrance into higher education to my experience as an undergraduate student. I was maybe a sophomore, and I got hired as a peer academic advisor I was at Illinois State University as an undergraduate student, and the equivalent of undergraduate studies there was called University College. And someone said, "Hey, you should apply for this job." And I got into it and loved it. I was, sort of a peer educator, a peer student leader. And that's where I really learned about professional opportunities in higher education. At the time, I was a music major as an undergraduate, trumpet player.
Nice.
And I was in music education, and it was about that point where I thought, I think I'm interested in teaching, but also I think there's a career for me in higher education. So I took a year and worked, thought I'd try it out as a professional, and I knew it was for me. I loved working with students, and I was an advisor first. Then I was worked as the registrar at a small college in Arizona, and realized I needed to learn a lot more if I was going to do this role in higher ed student affairs. And so I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois, and I'm going to maybe connect this to the second part of your question, which is sort of about my role. But I had known academic advising a little bit of sort of the registrar function, which at the college I worked at, it was, I was essentially the academic advisor, the registrar, the course planner. It was a very, very small college, but I knew I thought I was going to graduate school to be a professional academic advisor because that's what I knew. Yeah. I was also the first person in my family to go to college.
Nice.
So, I didn't have a lot of, mentors in my family. So anyways, I didn't know a lot, and so I started in my as a master's student at the University of Illinois, and I had to find a job, an assistantship, and so I interviewed for this role at the Office of Community College Research and Leadership, and interviewed with my what would soon to be my advisor, Deborah Bragg. Our higher ed listeners might know that name. She's a very prolific scholar and just incredible person and mentor and friend. And she hired me, and I thought, okay, I guess I'm going to be a research assistant. I thought I'd be, maybe a financial aid counselor or an academic advisor. Yeah. That would be my training as a graduate student. But I got this job doing research, and I thought I'll try it out. Why not? And it hooked me. And not only did the type of work hook me in terms of, being a graduate student researcher and learning the research process and research skills, but I learned about community colleges. I I grew up in a small rural area in Illinois, in West Central Illinois, and, our local community college, Carl Sandburg College. I'd been there. We took field trips there. We, in school, we would often interact with the college when they'd come to our school. So I knew a little bit about it, but I thought I know community colleges, but boy, I did not know community colleges. So anyways, it was really through, that experience that, as a master's student, that, it sparked my interest in research, my interest in community colleges, and eventually, I stayed at University of Illinois for my PhD, and have launched my entire research agenda and career around the sector, and it's my research has expanded beyond community colleges, but certainly on the topic of transfer. My passion for community colleges, what they do, the role they serve, has just, is really important to me. And I attribute it all to sort of that, that decision to say, yeah, let's give this a try as a graduate student. So that leads me, so second question is where, I was at Illinois for my master's, my PhD, and I stayed there for a postdoc working on a project about transfer.
Nice.
So I studied transfer and, a number of other things, which I'll talk a little bit more about as a graduate student. But my PhD advisor, Deb Bragg, she said, you should really think about faculty. And I thought, no, I don't think so. I think I'm going to go do some applied research. I thought about working as an institutional research. I had done some internships in that as a graduate student. But she said, I think you really ought to try out this faculty thing. So I applied for a faculty job, a few faculty jobs my first year, after my PhD while I was a postdoc, and Utah hired me. So
nice.
And so I started at the U as an assistant professor in our education leadership and policy department in the higher ed program, and on a tenure track, and have been able to build out my research agenda around what I like to characterize as sort of trying to understand how opportunity structures are designed in systems, and how public policy can help remove barriers and create more opportunity for undergraduate students, and particularly students who haven't accessed higher education historically. And then I've got a body of work around transfer and mobility. I've done early college options such as dual concurrent enrollment, LGBTQ students and policies, and sort of affordability, financial aid. I've done work around that. And then also a lot of my work is expanding. This is one thing I love about, particularly post-tenure life. You get to sort of study and expand your portfolio. So credit for prior learning, or PLA. I'm partnering with our colleague and friend Erin Castro on our prison education work. So again, thinking that the focus of all my interest is, how do we create more, how do we change systems and structures to support students' access to and success through higher education. So, and then here I am in undergraduate studies. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to come in work with undergraduate studies and our partners at Salt Lake Community College to develop better transfer pathways between our two institutions. And then a few years ago, we launched this Office for Transfer Student Success that has really been driven by, the need to serve transfer students, some big gaps in how we serve transfer students at the university, and also some really committed folks around campus who care about transfer students and care about how we, support them getting into the U and support them while we're here. So sorry, that was a long,
No, it's great.
That was a long, was that too long?
No, no.
Answer to your question?
No,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
And it gives me the opportunity to kind of pull out a couple of pieces. Like, do you remember when you're in a conversation, if I heard you correctly, and tell me if I got this wrong, but you're having a conversation along the way as an undergrad, and somebody says, you should go over there and try this thing out as a peer advisor. Do you remember that person?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to name them here,
Yeah.
but you've got that person, and then you've got a really wonderful graduate advisor, mentor. I'm wondering, Jason, if you could talk about, like, from those experiences when you were the student to now you're the faculty member and an assistant dean who's, mentoring students, not just in the graduate program in the College of Education and ELP, but also transfer students across a pretty complex R1 member of the AAU. Could you talk a little bit about, like, the individual role of the person who says to a student, I think you can do X?
Yeah.
It sounds like it's been transformative along your way, like for you as a student, and then flip that coin over and you've got you as faculty member, as administrator. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's a friend and colleague once, I heard them say something like to the effect of, our words are so powerful in ways we don't realize it. And it's just, I think, when I think back to the experiences of the two folks you mentioned, and I can think of many more people during my career. I just mentioned those two because given your question, but I think it's a reminder that whenever we have an opportunity to sort of help lift someone up, that we have to take it, and we've got to be sort of intentional and mindful about it always. And it's actually a lot to carry, because sometimes, as a instructor or advisor or any type of mentor role, we're often a parent, we're often carrying a lot on a daily basis, but it's a reminder that, we got to pay it forward. But it really, I think about lifting people up, because, so just to, I think to elaborate on that and your question, I think, and how I think about the work I do, and both from a scholar perspective, but also now as a, sort of as in my administrative role, is, making opportunities more accessible. And I think it's pretty simple, right? Like we have to make opportunities more accessible. Now we got to do that in really complex ways, but, I think, and I'm not often, perfect at it or good at it when I think of my, my advisees or, the students I work with, but knowing that certainly when someone reaches out or you hear something, you hear a need, that you're responsive and that you're attentive to that. Most students, particularly first gen students, but also college students in general, it's, we'll talk about this with the transfer student in a minute, but it's their first time doing college. So they don't know how to do it. Really, they haven't experienced it. They read about it. They've got advice from folks, but we all have, and we know a little bit more about how opportunity is structured. So how do we? So I think those individual moments are really important, and how do we, sort of make sure that we are making that opportunity a little bit wider for folks who are right behind us and coming up right after us.
Well, as a fellow first gen, I think part of that, it just resonates really deeply. No doubt it will for viewers or listeners, where thinking about kind of having an awareness, what I hear you describe is like an awareness and a consciousness around the space that we all occupy. Knowing that we've likely inherited that space and have the privilege to be in the space following someone. I know I do. But then also realizing perhaps that part of the work that we do in either our scholarship or in our teaching and our administrative work is preparing the space for the next person to come along and make improvements, right? Advance whatever the cause is further than you were, like any of us are able to do on our own. Right, knowing that it's and we'll get to that as well, a kind of joint venture that not one of us is able to do it solely on our own along the way. So I want to back up really quickly as well to something else you mentioned, which is, you arrive at the University of Utah. Do you remember what year you came to Utah?
2014.
2014. So pre-pandemic, you were here. You got to know the place, know the city.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine the university has changed a lot since 2014. Could you comment or think about and share thoughts on where we find ourselves today? I mean, it's a very different institution. You've served under a number of presidents and provosts, no doubt, a number of deans in the College of Education. 2014, I imagine Martha Bradley Evans was Dean of Undergraduate Studies by 2014. Share any thoughts or any insights about, where you find the University of Utah today, how we're able to do the work of student success, specifically of transfer student success. What has that journey looked like for you, not only doing your research, but also being engaged in kind of how we do programs, how we understand kind of our current space or place, how we set vision and goals, and then how we get to them.
Yeah. It's interesting you asked that question because I was just, we had some of our doctoral students on campus last week, and we were at the College of Education looking around, and I said, when I started in 2014, none of these buildings were here, or there were different buildings there. So Lassonde wasn't there. Gardner was Osh. There's the executive MBA building wasn't. Anyways, the campus has transformed, and I think I share that story just because it's the university is growing and continues to grow, and it's an exciting university to work at from that perspective, and when I think back to 2014, I really was in many ways just sort of this assistant professor trying to. I was really focused on my research, teaching. Focused on excelling at my teaching and supporting students. And now I'm in a very different place in terms of my research and my career, but. Let me talk about the transfer piece as you asked your question, because in 2015, then Provost Watkins, who was I think on your podcast, she and an amazing colleague and talk about mentors. When I was at the University of Illinois, her and Deborah Bragg, my advisor, worked on a transfer. They got a Lumina grant to study transfer at the University of Illinois. Deborah brought me in to help with the research, and I got to meet Ruth, and just she's been an incredible sort of mentor and supporter of mine since then. But she had a task force on transfer and asked me to be on it. And there was a number of faculty and staff around campus, and it was sort of like, let's take stock of what we're doing at the University of Utah to support transfer students. I pulled that up this was maybe a month or two ago, and sort of read through it pretty carefully. I hadn't in a while. Well, one of the things that was on that, on sort of the list of recommendations, was to sort of open an office for transfer students, or a center for transfer students. And thanks to your leadership, but I think where the university has evolved over the time, that's possible now, and I feel like we're just getting started in the work that we're doing. But I think the work of student success here, the conversation is so different than it was, I think, a decade ago. And again, I wasn't in an administrative role then, so I didn't quite know all the ins and outs, and I was a little more focused on just my own research, my own department. So I sort of have a broader view now than I did then. But I'll zoom out even more, because I think where we're at the university is sort of along a national trend, this is sort of put on my higher ed scholar hat here.
Please do.
We're, when I started graduate school at University of Illinois in 2007, we didn't have a college completion agenda. In fact, it was just a year or two later that Lumina and others announced and said, goal 2025. and it's 2025,
Yep.
right? They set a goal that 60% of Americans have a post-secondary credential by 2025. We didn't meet that goal. We've made a lot of progress though, and in fact, Lumina and other foundations just celebrated that progress because we have made incredible progress.
For sure.
So I think a lot of that has happened in the past. 10 years, and I think the U, has. With the leadership of, I think, Ruth, and since I've been here, David Pershing, Ruth, and Marty. And I would say folks across the university.
Yep.
But certainly, I think, and our current President Randall. I think we get that student success is important, and we've got to get students across the finish line. And we've done a good job, but boy, do we have more work to do.
Yep.
And I could go on, but I'll pause there. But I think we're right in line. I think with a lot of other institutions across the country, realizing that like we can do some things better to support students. So it's exciting to be here. I feel like there's I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit more about transfer specifically, but I think there's, just broadly, there's a lot of innovation happening.
Yeah. Yeah, please do. Speak to the work that you've seen kind of evolve, the need, as it were, and that need kind of driving us towards trying, intervening, like doing, experimenting, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, understanding one from a data perspective so that we make kind of student-driven but data-informed decisions, launching an office for transfer student success, what that signals to students. You've been critical to it, Jason. I've had a front row seat watching you and folks like Paul Fisk who care very deeply and who have been doing the work, doing research, doing like actual praxis, showing up at orientations, talking to transfer students, talking to their family, their supporters, and others, being out in the community saying, you may start at institution X, but we want you, if you're interested, there is a place for you at the University of Utah.
Yeah. I love to talk about this. So I'm glad we get to go a little bit deeper. So one thing that I really appreciate about the U is that, and there's a lot of AAU institutions that, don't admit or enroll as many transfer students as we do. And I really think that's important for the U, just not because we're here, but because of the community that we serve and the post-secondary ecosystem in the state. So I think it's really important that we maintain access. And so I really care about this work here, but also broadly, one of the reasons that, I'm passionate about this is because of my own experience as a first-gen student and some of the opportunities that were available to me in high school and that weren't available to me. And some of that relates to my work on dual concurrent enrollment, but community colleges are the access point for the majority. I'm going to say the majority of college students, because we actually have community colleges educate a lot of non-credit, do a lot of non-credit education that doesn't get counted, but they represent an incredible number of students in our post-secondary ecosystem, and they do that because they're in every community around the country, literally. So. Now, some of them offer bachelor's degrees, so they might not be called a community college, but they're a community college. They're accessible, they're affordable, they're located, 2 miles down the road rather than 200 miles down the road, and they are literally the only practical starting point for so many college students. And online education has changed some of that, but not really. The community colleges, are still what a lot of folks know. Ask someone, hey, what's your local community college? I bet they can tell you.
Yeah.
And then you ask a group of college graduates or, professionals and say, how many of you are transfer students? And you'll be surprised at how many people raise their hands.
Yep.
In fact, it's about half. The National Student Clearinghouse did a study a few years ago. It's about 46%, almost half of bachelor's degree graduates have an attendance record at a community college. So not only do they serve people who, don't transfer, or they get a workforce credential, but they're actually essential to our bachelor's degree completers, the economy, we could go on about why they matter. But anyways, all of that's important to why a place like the U, and I would argue other research universities as well, but certainly public institutions, why I think transfer, the commitment to transfer is so important, because community colleges are educating, millions of students every year. So, so when, rewind to 2015, we did you look at, our assessment, even in that report, and it's, I think it's, we've had historically at the U a strong commitment to enrolling transfer students, and I think are just catching up to how do we support them once they're here. And I would say, even though we can enroll a transfer student, but that doesn't mean we're getting them excited about transferring and prepared to transfer. So we've been able in the last few years to think strategically with our partners across campus, certainly our partners at Salt Lake Community College, to think about how we can better, sort of prepare students to transfer, to welcome them once they're here, and then really support them once they get here. So we've done a few, you want me to talk about a few of the things that we've done?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, the first thing we did 5 years ago when I started in this role was really the curricular piece, and that work had sort of been started before I got to it, but realizing that we've got, particularly with our Salt Lake Community College partners, where we have, 40% of our transfer students, tightening curricular pathways. And again, some of that work was started before I got here, but we've continued it to make sure our, students aren't going to lose credits, and that, we don't have duplicative curriculum and courses. And so that's hard faculty to faculty work.
Yeah.
But it's really important, because that's where the rubber meets, sort of hits the road, and every credit lost is, thousands, hundreds or thousands of dollars for students. It's just really important.
Time and money.
It's time and money, and also can be the deciding factor for whether a student actually comes here or not, right? Students are savvy these days. They can, they're savvy.
Find a way somewhere else.
They'll find a way somewhere else. And it's not, and it's really important for students to know that, we honor their work, and their work at their prior college matters. So anyways, that's hard curricular work, but really it's essential. We have in Utah, like a lot of other states, we have a strong statewide policy for transfer, relatively speaking. So there's good sort of statewide infrastructure to support transfer from a curricular perspective. So that's work that we've done and need to continue to do, because curriculum changes regularly. So we can't, it's not one and done. It's a continuous process. We also, we know this from the research pretty well, that transfer students, it sort of feels like starting over when they transfer, and that they have to relearn a new institution. Some of them who are transferring from another state or another geographic area, they're learning a new city, a new organization, and by the way, they don't have any friends here.
Yeah,
they don't have any people. They're not connected. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, we had some small programs in place to support students during the transition and post-transfer, but we've spent some time developing those programs. And so we've got workshops for transfer students. We've got a new transfer student welcome. We know we want them to meet other students when they're here. We want them to feel like they aren't alone. And then we want them, what's really important, and you know this better than anyone, is that they got to get connected to the programs and resources that we know are going to have the best and the biggest impact on them. Things like undergraduate research and internships. And we want to make sure they're connected to academic resources like tutoring and student success coaches. So we're really intentional about communicating and connecting with students, right as soon as we can when they're, when they're finalizing their decision to come to the U and here for orientation, and making sure they know that, the suite of resources and opportunities and experiences that the university has to offer for any student are available for them as transfer students. And in fact, we've got a lot of programs and services around campuses that are just for transfer students. And we want some more of those because sometimes they have to be designed a little bit differently than they are for the freshmen student. So, and then this fall, we're in the process of launching a new scholars program for transfer students, and seeing really strong interest right away as we started to market that and recruit students at summer orientation this summer. So we're trying to build something. I guess broadly, when I zoom out, we're trying to build infrastructure that really supports students and signals to transfer students that this is a place for you and that we're here to support you. Yeah.
I want you to chat a little bit about, if you will, Crimson Transfer Honor Society in just a moment. Yeah. Because I think it's a highlight, at least for my spring, when we do. We celebrate students who are part of the Honor Society. But I'm thinking, as I was listening to you, Jason, part of it, as an undergrad, I didn't transfer, but I was a first-gen kid, and I think a lot about, and I was a low-income kid, I'm in the working class of this country. The points of I'm going to be really purposeful with language here, because we can't say, we very much should not even imply that every student that's part of a community college is low income or first-gen. No. But where those intersections happen, so I think about myself, and which is a dangerous thing. I just want to caution everybody about that. Students, you cannot write yourself into their journey. And for the folks who are in faculty or administrative positions, writing, your child who is in college journey onto all students is a mistake. But that's a side note. My main point is this: thinking about, and because I am privileged to be in conversation with a lot of students across this institution, which I think is important, listen to students. Part of it, for me, and I'm wondering if this resonates with you, especially as we go about, creating larger kind of communities that signal to students in very powerful ways, beyond just telling them that they belong, empowering them to have a sense within themselves of kind of ownership, of engagement, of this is my university, right? I'm proud to be part of this university. I think about, it wasn't until, for me, at a regional, comprehensive 4-year, it wasn't until year 3 that I really felt like I'd come to start knowing the place. That's when I got involved in student governments, when I started volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, and I really began to kind of hit a groove of these are the kinds of people that I'd like to be around. And I think the work for transfer is in some ways true, that it's comparable to the work we try to do for first-year students as well, which is knowing that, and knowing that can be the case, and knowing that can lead to students stopping out or dropping out. It's trying to move the power of student success, right? It's trying to move those interventions up in the life cycle so that as soon, even before for transfer students, and the same is true for first-year students, before they ever get here, they can start building that affinity and building a connection that moves beyond the idea of telling folks, no, trust us. Trust the talking head at an orientation session or something like that. All will be well. You will belong. And instead, giving part of that ownership stake, acknowledging it with the student, right? Or helping to tune them in on, no, this too is yours, right? I'm wondering if that plays into some of the philosophy of the work that you all have been doing. And then if you could speak to the Honor Society as well, which again is it's just amazing work. I am grateful for the work that you and your team do, because it, again, creates those spaces for our transfer students.
Yeah, it's sort of, it makes me think of, just one of the approaches that we've taken is letting students, asking them to co-create, right? I mean, this is student development theory 101, by the way, right?
Yeah.
When we think of where students are developmentally as college students, they're, and just where they're at in their life. Let's just say a traditional student. We can talk about adult learners, but we know how they learn, and it's not by us telling them.
Right.
High school students, a student coming out of high school and coming right to college, they're used to, that's sort of where they're at developmentally, although this generation and technology is shifting that a little bit. But I think, we need, speaking of the broader purpose of higher ed and why we're here is to help develop people and develop them as to be citizens and to contribute and to grow and to create, right? So why wouldn't we design that into our programming?
Yeah.
And I think we're just getting started, but one of the things so Crimson Transfer Honor Society, and I give Paul Fisk, he has been working with transfer students on this campus for 10 years, and full credit to him for designing this when he's been advising or co-advising that group for a while, and it's just flourished in the past couple of years. I mean, it's just flourished. And that's in large part to the work that he's done. And I think the culture in undergraduate studies and that we've been able to create over the past couple of years. But, we embed leadership opportunities, and there's pretty intentional, engagement with those leaders to make sure they're part of creating the programming and the work. And it's not just us saying, here's what you need to do and here's how you have to do it. I mean, they are active designers of what we're doing. And and then we, CTHS it's for our outstanding transfer students who do well academically, who are engaged, who are service oriented. There's a service component to it. And every year we get to, induct them into the Honor Society and celebrate their achievements. And then many of them, they have to maintain a GPA to stay in the Honor Society, but they stay engaged. They have they have social events, they organize, they have service projects, and it gives them I think the group gives them some purpose and meaning, and they make friends, and that's so important. But anyway, I want to do more. The more we can create opportunities for students to co-create and design, I think the more we're sort of achieving our mission in public higher ed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the concept of where we talk about any and all the work that we do is for and with students. Mm-hmm. And I think that creates a deeper impact and a longer kind of sustainability for programs. Yeah. Because again, if they've got a vested interest in it, they're showing up. Yeah. Right. Because it's not us, telling them do X. Yeah. For whatever output. Okay, we could chat for a very long time. I think topics that we're both really committed to and passionate about. I want to ask you about. We covered a couple of impacts, challenges. Opportunities, right? So for anybody who's listening or viewing, I just want to go ahead and say and echo it in any way you want or take us in another direction. I mean, it is a community here that cares very deeply about an set of evidence-based approaches to transfer student success. And it's an open community that we welcome any number of partners throughout campus, or really anybody within, listening or viewing of this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. It's like if that was part of your experience and you want to pay it forward and support students, we will. I'll look to camera. We will take your money and do good things with it. Are there other opportunities you want to mention in that space, Jason? Just about because as we are, I agree with you. We're just beginning. It's building on a lot of great work that has happened. things that you see kind of right around the corner, things that you hope that we might accomplish next?
Yeah. Well, one is, I think, we have a lot of students who say they want to transfer but never do. And here I'm particularly thinking of, the community college student or this, so particularly our SLIC students. I would also say, we've got at the U and probably at a lot of institutions across the country, right? Like we have more students who are coming from out of state, right? Because the U is an attractive place, but we also have, I think, a little bit more, students are a little bit more mobile, but so how we reduce barriers and sort of basically give opportunities for students to come here and assure admission. So I think I would love for us to think more creatively about how we can do that in the same way that we've done sort of, at the, many states now have policies that sort of help ease the admission process, and Utah's experimenting with this with a statewide admission application. So how can we creatively explore those solutions for transfer students? I would say the biggest, a huge opportunity is in the AI space. I mean, one of I'm going to go back to, every credit lost is time and money. And we have sort of antiquated processes for reviewing students' prior coursework and identifying what counts, what doesn't count. It's a laborious process, and there are some tech solutions that are on the horizon. And by the way, when I think of transfer, right, we've been talking mostly about transfer students, but this is really about transfer credit. And, I do work on dual concurrent enrollment. Yep. The average high school graduate, depending on the state, I mean, you're likely going to have 6 to 9 credits of dual concurrent enrollment or AP. Think of adult students, credit for prior learning. So anyways, we've got to be more efficient. We don't need a human to review every course description and pull up a syllabi. So tech solutions are out there and are currently, there's a few that I'm aware of that we've got to move on those because, this is a barrier for timely degree completion, and it doesn't help, I think, the value case, the affordability challenge that I think we haven't talked much about affordability, but that's huge for transfer students as well. So tech opportunities. And then I think the other thing is, you and I have talked about this in terms of, most, I'm going to zoom out. I like to zoom out as I think of transfer stuff, but, and just in terms of if folks listening outside of Utah or even in other states where most institutions, four-year institutions like ours, or even community colleges, we tend to have sort of, partnerships, so an institution like ours, we have one primary transfer partnership, depending on the locality, institutions might have 2 or 3, right? We got to get more creative with our big transfer partners. We've got to look for, efficiencies and both from a policy perspective, but also from a technology perspective. Can we creatively integrate technology? Can we streamline policies? Can we maybe even do some interesting cost sharing in ways that we haven't explored? Because the reality is our students are moving between our institutions, whether we want them to or not. Yeah. I mean, that's the life of the real college student is they're going to make a decision to move institutions. We're going to at an institution like ours, we're going to do our best to keep them here, but life might happen, and that's why we know it happens. So let's make it easier for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the orientation that I hear you describing there, again, tell me if I got it wrong, is, seeing the student, and we got a little bit of this artwork kind of scattered throughout our building, at least throughout Sill Center, is the idea that the student is the most important person. Mm-hmm. And that all of our policies and our practices and our curriculum and our, should be oriented to putting students first. And if that's the orientation, then it makes even the hard kind of policy or structural kind of questions, it creates the kind of momentum that you need to help drive that. If in fact you are like the quest is moving towards a student first orientation for a very complex organization.
Yeah.
Be it a very large, R1 community college, liberal arts college, what have you. I mean, they're all complex in one way or another. But if the goal is putting students first and then trying to achieve what they need to achieve, like what is it going to do for their lives?
Yeah.
What I hear you describing there is kind of a recalibration of what matters and how we express the values, not just in our words, but in what we're actually doing. Yeah. Which I'll agree with your earlier statement about it's an exciting time to be at the University of Utah because of exactly that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say on that, I think it's, I wrote a piece, this was, 7 or 8 years ago now on transfer, and it was sort of a lit review, and, it was with a colleague, and we sort of said something like, our system wasn't designed for transfer. Now, parts of it were vertical transfer. I mean, sort of, there was some intentionality behind it, but there are a lot of incentives in place that do not support transfer at the federal and state policy levels. And so I think where the rubber hits the road for most students is at the institutional level, and how we can sort of be a little bit more creative and innovative, and flexible to really support the student, and that it's flexibility, particularly for our transfer students.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I'll just say two quick things, and then I want to ask you the same question we ask everybody. Yeah. So there's the prep for that, and the noise that may accompany it, which has become a thing on this podcast. Okay. The flexibility, from my perspective, is kind of, and I'm interested to hear your thought about, is this right from where you sit as a scholar and a practitioner? Like, the flexibility is both inward and outward, right? To your point about the policy state within, like if you're a public institution, you've likely got a governing board, regents, trustees, whomever, the boards of some sort. So flexibility in that regard, where in the institutions, if they're in a system, they say, well, okay, here's the policy, how that policy is playing out on the ground as we're interacting with students. Either it's working, could be better, or it's not working at all, and it must be better. That's the flexibility of kind of, engagement and participation in that way. I think the internal flexibility within an institution is also like, okay, we're going to change something, right? Which oftentimes can begin to challenge the status quo. Yeah. So, because you are a scholar of credit for prior learning as well, I'll just mention it. We've made some noise of late. Yeah. I think it's positive noise. I think it's opening up greater opportunity for more students. More information forthcoming, more kind of like the ins and outs of how it will operate. But at the core of it, I can say definitively, is about opening up greater opportunities for more students to have learning acknowledged, credit awarded, and on the way to timely completion, governed by the faculty who award credit where students can demonstrate learning. And I don't know, part of the way that you describe flexibility made me think about in a couple of different directions. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, it does. And oh gosh, we could talk about credit for prior learning, but I think we have traditions and histories and systems in higher education that serve purposes, I think, that are, really important. And then we have others that maybe serve purposes that are less important. So I think it really is about how do we understand what we value and how those values translate into, policies and practices that then influence students, and sort of thinking about the alignment between, what we do, why we do it, and then sort of the actual impacts on students. And maybe that, pretty abstract and theoretical, but I think we can, when we think about the barriers for transfer students, and some of which, by the way, if we fix these for transfer students, I think they're going to, back to my point, right? Like if we can do credit better for transfer students, it's going to help every first freshman student that's coming in. So we just have to, we students first, right? Like what are those barriers? And the more we listen to them, the more that we learn that we just, there's a great piece that, on transfer, was one of the first pieces I read. And I always mention it to our staff and folks when they ask me about transfer. Barbara Townsend wrote it. It was the first sort of big study published by, one of the top journals in higher ed on transfer students. It was a case study between a community college and the University of Missouri, similar institutional type, and it was a qualitative study. And the title was something like, handhold a little bit. And it was based on a student quote saying, I just need a handhold a little bit. And part of the premise was that institutions, particularly public research institutions, they prioritized freshman students so much over time because that's the priority. So, but that quote is applicable to so much more, right? A handhold. I just need a little bit of handhold.
Yeah.
Anyways, but we got to listen to students if we know which hand to hold and,
and how long,
when to let go and when to let go.
And when to let go and when to say like, okay, and to know that you can let go and I'm still going to be here if you need to come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I take your point and I think you're absolutely right. And say 2015 to 2025, 10 years, the change of one institution over the course of 10 years and our ability to execute on our values and on the promise that we have and the commitments that we have to students, it makes me wonder where we'll be in 2035, where we'll be in 2045. And I think, from where I sit, students and the public writ large are counting on us, I think more than ever before, to live up to and to fulfill and exceed the promise of public higher education. So that's a segue to our last question that we ask everybody. In that space, and even, zoom out, zoom in, how do we go about, and you've led it, Jason, and so many folks who've been on the podcast, I'm just grateful for your time, by the way, and grateful for your leadership, because I think how we go about answering this question about creating lasting and transformative change and how we go about doing it together, I think it's the direct kind of impact. I know there's the sound.
What's happening?
That's the, how we go about working towards that, because, there's lots of studies out, as well, about having, the public having lost trust, about the quote unquote crisis of where we kind of find ourselves right now in terms of higher education. And that could take us down a lot of different roads. But the notion of how we go about, one piece of advice from your experience, from things that you've seen that worked, you could invert it and say the things that haven't worked, so we don't do that, How do we go about creating lasting transformative change together?
I love this question. So a few weeks ago, I was at a meeting and I heard a leader of a national organization talk about, we're talking about the moment that we're in right now and, sort of federal, state policy. I mean, all, you name it. And she said something that really resonated with me that makes me think of this question. And I'm coming into I think I've shared with you, I'm the president-elect for the Council for the Study of Community Colleges. So thinking quite a bit about our scholarly community this year as I'm in that role and in it for a couple of years. And this is someone, leader in the community college space. And she said, one of the challenges right now for community colleges is that we focus so long on sort of the EM issue, the enrollment management issue, and sort of the bottom of the funnel, right? Because it's all, how do we get students in? But we've lost sight of the top of the funnel. And so when I think of this question, I think of, and just, it made me think of this comment, because I think it goes back to community and the people we serve. And this goes for public higher ed and private higher ed, by the way. But
okay.
I think we have to, but particularly more important for public higher ed, right? But I think it's about the communities that we serve and making sure that they're represented, they're engaged, they're part of, back to your question about the students, like they're part of the conversation from the beginning, and that they are the why, right, for the work that we do. And it sounds cheesy, but I really believe it. And the more I think, the longer I've been in, my career, it's, there's all sorts of incentives not to focus on the community.
Yeah.
And sort of, that part of the why. I mean, there's some of them legitimate reasons, but at the end of the day, if we're not, responsive to our community, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think, together, right? I think together we've got, in higher ed, sometimes we like to listen to ourselves and talk to ourselves and talk to each other. And are you hearing this? Yeah. Is that what, it's like, when was the last time you asked your neighbor, right? Like, hey, tell me about, the University of Utah or Salt Lake Community. Like, tell me, how we doing? So, anyways, lasting change, transformative change is we've got to be connected to the people that we serve and the folks who are going to be, this going back to the EM, who are going to be essential to the recruitment process.
Yeah.
The national studies, I always go back to, I think it's NELS, one of the K-12 national longitudinal studies that you say, they ask high school students, what's the biggest influence on your education and career decisions? And it's not the teacher, it's not the counselor, it's their family and friends.
Yeah.
Right. So anyways, it's going to solve our EM problem, our EM issues, but more importantly, we're here for, to transform people's lives and to make communities grow and support the well-being of our society. So I think we gotta start with the community, and then we end with the community. Yeah.
Jason, I'm really grateful. At the risk of extending us too long, I'm going to run one thing by you really quick.
Yeah.
I had breakfast this morning with a mutual friend and colleague of ours, and as we were finishing up, wait staff came over and said, both of you look like you work at the University of Utah. And we said, yeah, we do. And they said, the University of Utah is such a great place. They had moved here from North Carolina. Such a great institution, and they shared a bit about their academic interests and the like. And then they said something that it stuck. It's been with me all day long. And it was, how are you all doing? And I think our willingness to to engage early on, let them know that they were safe to ask us a question about how we're doing.
Yeah.
And so I'll ask you in reply the ability for us to, because I think you're absolutely right. Our ability as academics, as folks who live and breathe higher ed, we're very good at debating and engaging in dialogue and dialectics and the like. I'm wondering, as you suggested, like our ability to focus on community, engage with community, like our ability like to really listen to people. It occurs to me, like as I was sitting there this morning, and again, it's been with me all day, it's kind of like, I think people are willing to share with you like constructive, supportive, challenging information if they know that you're actually really willing to hear it. And I don't know if that, how that strikes you, but it's like, to some extent, it seems like we've created a space. We've let a space kind of evolve between our institutions and the people, the communities that we're meant to serve, because somewhere along the way, we signaled that we're not really all that interested in listening.
Yeah.
Those can be my words and not yours, but
I mean, no, I think that is, you said it well, right? We've got to, listen. I mean, again, last week we had doctoral students on campus, and we're, talking about leadership and educational policy, and it's, when you think of leaders and leadership, good leaders listen, right? And I think sometimes, even I would just say as an average fact, let's say go back to 2014, like I didn't spend much time listening. It's like, but we really need to, right? As listening to our community, right? Like we really need to understand. It's not just, the responsibility is just not the leaders, sort of those in positional leadership roles. But I think we'd all benefit from listening a little bit more in terms of, lasting change. And so, no, that does resonate with me. And together, listening together.
Yeah. It's going to take all of us for sure, right? Jason, thank you for being willing to come on, share any number of ideas and insights. I'm grateful for your work. I'm grateful for you as a colleague. This place is a better place because you're here. Thank you, Jason.
Likewise. Thank you.
Listeners, viewers, this has been Together, a higher ed podcast. Join us next time.